absolute without any division.
You're Arnold, Habibi.
And
Thanks.
you have any to us. This is a weakness.
Yeah, the sun, yeah.
Exactly.
I agree.
So any being who is dependent and any being who is independent, you know
Fallacy.
who is perfect and who is
That's a
not
fallacy.
perfect.
That's a fallacy.
The one who is dependent, like your bike, is not more perfect than the creator. Because the creator, by definition, God, is independent and the bike is dependent. So how can you say a dependent thing or an object or a being or an entity, a person, can be likewise the same as an independent being?
Because you circularly presuppose that dependence is a weakness, which you've never substantiated.
Do you see?
In your argument,
Let's
you
hear
said is a weaker being is one that has weaknesses lesser than a one that does not have weaknesses.
Go ahead.
I agree with that, obviously, of course. The one that has weaknesses is lesser, right? But you're implicitly assuming that dependence is a weakness. I'm asking you now, without circularly presupposing it, substantiate
I will do
that
that.
dependence as dependence.
I think we left that argument last time.
Is a weakness.
Yeah,
Wait.
You made your point.
5 seconds. Not an example of dependence, not a specific example. I mean, dependence in principle is a weakness. There's
Exactly.
a huge difference
Exactly.
between those two things.
Which
Substantiate.
Which philosopher? Okay, we'll come back to that.
Let me tell
Because
you
you talk
something.
about
Yeah?
philosophy, we'll talk about philosophy.
Sure.
Listen, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
The simple thing. Us and you, we agree. Is God all powerful?
Yes. In principle, yes.
What do you mean in principle? Not in everything. So in some other, what do you mean by in principle?
principle.
Because I like the things which is clear. You say in principle, meaning there are things that he's not all powerful. Are you saying this?
In principle means that you're talking about the proper philosophical definition of what it means to be
Simple
God.
as that. We all agree and mention the Bible, mention the Quran, that God is all powerful. Yes. So if you say is all powerful, now when you say is all powerful, can God become not all powerful at certain point?
Yes.
Okay, that's true. That's the point. You see here. That's the point here.
Ceasing to be all powerful.
You see here.
That's the Christian problem.
That's the Christian. You see here. When you say they're saying like this, yeah. They're saying no, God is all powerful, but sometimes He chooses not to be all powerful.
Can I parody this?
Sometimes He will leave the power and become weak.
Islam has this problem as well.
One second.
Islam has this
One
problem.
second. One second. We'll come to Islam.
Okay.
Let's talk about Christianity.
Yeah.
So sometimes God will choose not to be all powerful, so He'll become weak. Now sometimes instead is God Almighty, they'll say yes. But Jesus wasn't Almighty because He was humiliated on earth. People, they hit Him, they tortured Him, and according to Him, they killed Him. Meaning He's not all powerful at that point. Adding to this, when we say to them, okay, is God is all knowing? So they say yes, God is all knowing. Now when it comes to Jesus, Jesus is ignorant of certain things, which means He's not all knowing. So there are, in the definition of Jesus to be a divine, that literally all the conditions that even the Christian and the Muslims and everyone, they agreed about the definition of divine, they will withdraw all of these conditions when it comes to Jesus. You see the point? That shows inconsistency in terms of defining the divine. I will ask you, what is the divine?
Let's come back to you. Do you agree a being is more perfect in the attributes and characteristics, the essential characteristics that we agreed earlier?
Okay.
One who is dependent on someone else, or one who is independent? Who is more perfect and more absolute
So a mom is more perfect than the baby. That's what you're saying.
When it comes to say, you've got two concepts of God. One God relies on someone else to do things.
We're not saying that though.
I'm not talking about your God, right? So one God has to do everything that God tells him to do. Totally dependent. Takes orders, and in fact, cannot do anything apart from what that other God tells him to do. And the other God is totally sovereign. Does things what he wills. Which one do you think is maximally perfect?
You then have two gods.
Exactly.
We only have one God.
Which one is maximally perfect?
You've
The
got
one
two
who's
gods.
dependent?
Let's ask Mr. Go ahead.
We only have one God.
Let him think. You can speak to him, but also continue the
The one who
discussion.
is sovereign.
Even your intuition will tell you the one who's sovereign, not the one who's dependent.
Yes.
So I don't need to go to a reputable scholar saying, no, this bike can be equally perfect we have independent creator. I don't need a quotation from a reputable scholar
No, you need
or
a
a philosopher.
proof. You can't assert something without proving it.
I'm sorry, I cannot speak to someone who says it is possible equally that you have this bike who is dependent
No, that's not what I'm
on
saying.
the equal footing on someone who is independent.
That's not what I said.
So now, if you have a God concept of God, in which one God is dependent and the other is not, you would say the one who is dependent cannot be even qualified to be God.
Why?
By definition, God has to be independent.
Why? Why? Prove it.
Oh, okay.
He's never actually demonstrated that
Look.
dependence in itself
I
is
don't
a
need
God.
to
He's
demonstrate to
presupposed
you.
it.
Look,
And he's relied on it being apparently intuitive from an Islamic parasite. He's never no reputable philosopher of religion buys into
do you see the problem? He's relying on what?
Philosophers
He
of
has to be
religion.
reputable. Which reputable philosopher that you have read said God can be dependent?
Linda Zagzebski.
And he says God can be dependent.
She, yes.
She said God can be dependent.
Yes.
Okay, that's the God that I'm not going to worship, and you're not going to worship, and you're not going to worship.
Okay,
You know why?
you don't understand anything.
No.
You just rely to
No.
rhetoric and
I
into-
agree. So you have a reputable scholar whose repute is questioned from me. Why? Because you have a scholar who is saying, oh, a God that is dependent like a bike, who is dependent, is worthy of worship.
Like a bike.
Look,
It's not analogous.
would you really worship a God? Let me ask you this question. Who is dependent on someone else? Do you think that God is worthy of worship?
He's the Christian.
That God itself is dependent on someone else?
Somehow.
Just got to think about it.
Please think. But you would know when you do think, and you'll come to this conclusion that it is not making any sense for a rational human being, reasonable human being, to take a God as God when that being is dependent. Because God, by definition, has been self-sufficient. If you say God has been given power, if you give power to someone and they're dependent on someone to give them power, that's what dependence is. So you receive power, you receive authority, you receive the thing to do, you receive knowledge, you are fully dependent on someone else to give you this. That means someone is greater than you. That's what it means. Dependence means the one who doesn't depend on anyone is greater than you.
So like someone like Einstein, who would have been like read books and like learned, given knowledge by people who came before him. Surely he's better than them because I know who Einstein is and I don't know who they are.
We're talking about
You know
the
what I mean?
concept of, when we talk about God, you
I can't
cannot,
understand the passing
remember,
on knowledge. Sorry.
how did I start discussing with you about this bike?
Yeah.
And you considered immediately like how ridiculous it is to worship this bike. And now we went through a process in which we realized the bike cannot be worthy of worship. And we gave reasons.
Why? What was the reason?
You can work it out. So we gave reasons.
This is
No,
powerful.
I'm not engaging with you.
Intuition.
Because I don't consider the way you argue is something beneficial at all. Because what you're saying is, my reputable scholars that I follow says God can be dependent. Any scholar who says God can be dependent is not a scholar of that caliber. I dispute their scholarship. You know why? You can get a PhD. Let me tell you something. Do you think it's impossible for me to get a PhD or you to get a PhD if you really work hard?
What's it?
Is it
Yeah, PhD
really in philosophy?
If you study,
Right. If you study really meticulously and hard, and you're a bright student, you can get a PhD. Right? No problem. I mean, I got distinction and masters. I mean, I didn't have to work that hard. So, does it make me like I'm a stupid guy or something? No. It makes me a normal individual guy who works like everyone else. But if I do a PhD like you do a PhD, it is not impossible. But now, imagine now, I get a PhD, and I have so much publication and so on, and I say weird things like that. You know what? God can cease to exist. Just because I have a theory. It doesn't make sense to say this guy is a reputable scholar. You will say, look, he's out of his mind in his logic and argumentation. He's trying to say something which is totally not right. Listen. I don't. In fact, the logic thing they bring out, logically you can be infinite and finite at the same time. If you bring that logic, I would say, no, thank you. I don't buy this logic.
You can show to me why that's wrong.
Hang on.
Whereas you haven't done that here.
Do you believe that God can be infinite and finite at the same time?
From every angle, no. In principle, no.
Hang on. Let me start again. In any angle, do you believe God can be existent and non-existent at the same time?
No. Well, no, obviously.
Why not?
Because that defies the law of non-contradiction.
Fine. So you abide by the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, I abide
So
by
do you
the law.
believe God can be knowledgeable, all-knowing, and ignorant at the same time?
Yeah, because
Hear that.
those aren't contradictory.
You see now he said.
Wait. You said knowledgeable.
All
and
knowledgeable
ignorant.
means.
I'm knowledgeable and ignorant at the
Let
same
me
time.
explain what I mean.
Okay.
All knowledgeable means you have 100% knowledge of everything,
Yeah.
and you're 0% ignorant of anything.
Yeah.
So can you be 100% knowledgeable and 5% ignorant? A being?
Not in principle, no.
No, in any principle.
No, because you need to understand
No,
what's
no, no.
meant by
Hang on. Let me ask you
You
again.
can't define terms how you want.
Let me ask you again. In any way, shape, or form in your logic that you study in Oxford, can you be 100% knowledgeable in something and 5% ignorant in the same thing?
In any way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
Yes.
See?
Because he's saying, okay, look, if he's saying from every...
That's Christian logic.
This isn't Christian logic.
It is.
This is basic definitions. You said in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Right? One way, shape, or form would be if you apply different definitions. Right? Is that
Are you
not
going to
any way, shape, or form?
redefine at one point here
You
continuity
said
and
you
another?
can- No, this is the reason. Well, you said it in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going with what you said. You
Yeah.
said in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
One way to
Give an example.
obviate that problem would be to fallaciously define them wrong way.
Give me an example.
Okay, so I define all knowledge as literally knowing everything, and I define ignorance as having a bicycle, right? It's ridiculous.
Hang on. Ignorance is defining what?
As having a bicycle, something stupid, right?
No, that's not the definition. That's discarded in the first
Which
place.
is literally my point.
No.
That's literally
No.
my point.
The reason when we talk
You're
about
missing my
knowledge,
point, Mansur.
look, as an Oxford student, you should really be more sensible.
I am being sensible.
No,
I'm
you're
trying
not.
to show you how
Let
you
me
can play with
tell you
definitions,
something.
and that's why
When we
you
talk
need
about
to
knowledge,
listen.
right? Knowledge means what? What does knowledge mean?
I don't know how you define it. How do you define it? You act like that's a basic
Okay,
question. You
do
know
I
that's
know
been
your
debated
name?
on today.
Possibly not, because I haven't asked you and you
What's
didn't
your
tell me. Do you know my name?
No, what's your name?
Yeah, Mansoor.
Mansoor, nice to meet you. I'm Rob.
Okay, nice meeting you. Now,
What's your name? Luca.
what's your name again?
Rob.
Rob, now I know your name. So in my understanding, in my knowledge base, I have got your name, right?
What is knowledge?
I don't have to discuss that. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Rob.
You've given an example
So
of
now,
knowledge,
Rob,
not definition.
I am aware in my consciousness, that you're called Rob. You go by the name Rob.
Okay.
Now, if I was all knowledgeable being, meaning I do not have any limitation of time. I know your name from eternity to eternity. There is not a fraction of a second in time, in our understanding of time, that I will not know your name. That's what I mean by all knowledgeable. So I will always know your name, like I always knew your name, and I always will ever know your name.
So all knowledgeable is knowing all facts forever.
No. That name of yours, for example,
Yes.
in this instance, that I will always know. There will not be, when I say all the time means what? No limitation of our past, present, and future confinement within this time frame. So when I am all knowledgeable, when God is all knowledgeable of your name, Rob, there cannot be a time in the future when He will be not knowledgeable of your name. That's what I mean by all knowledgeable. Now if I ask you, can the same God know your name and then not know your name tomorrow for 30-second window? Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, he doesn't know your name. Is it possible?
Is it possible for
Is it
him
rationally possible?
to then know my name at all times?
No. Knowing your name all the time. Including all the time.
Tomorrow,
And tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, he doesn't know your name. Does it make sense?
What you're telling me makes sense, yeah.
So he has to know your name, right? He cannot not know your name. He can't just simply say, oh, what was your name? 8 o'clock he says, Rob, Bob, Tom. He can't do that because I already defined by all knowing means he knows it all the time.
Okay.
So that's what I mean. Can God be all knowledgeable and ignorant? The answer is no.
Okay, that's
Right.
Why not?
Can God be? He says, why not?
Can I explain how
Thank
that's
you,
possible?
thank you.
I can explain how
Go
it's
back to Oxford. I'm sure they
If I
teach
can
you very
explain how
well.
it's possible,
I don't
is
need the
that relevant?
explanation.
Can you explain why it isn't? It is possible, and you explain why it isn't.
He's showing why it isn't possible, and that's very obvious, right? He's showing that according to the law of non-contradiction, you can't have all knowledgeable and any level of ignorance at the same time, right? And I agree with that, unless there is a rectifying factor which then mitigates that difference.
Okay, show us how you can.
So the rectifying factor would be...
So in this example, you're just saying Rob example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, no, actually, because
Give that example.
we're all talking about God the Son.
No. Rob.
I'm keeping it
No.
relevant. I'm
Rob.
keeping it
Rob.
relevant.
We want to talk about Rob.
You can
not
start
analogous.
with
Be
Jesus.
fair,
Start
be
with
fair.
Jesus and then go to me.
I'm not sure I can go to you because it's not analogous. So it
that's
won't
the problem.
work. Because
What
That's why Christians try to avoid
God
the
the Son
problem they
is
suffer.
not you and us.
Don't try to avoid anything.
Okay.
That's exactly what you're doing.
God the Son has God the Son.
No need to.
God the Son has God the Son. He possesses all the divine attributes: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence.
No, they don't actually. They're different.
Okay, so he possesses all those. That's God the Son in principle as God the Son. God the Son, by his omnipotence, can also choose to take on an additional nature. That additional nature is a limited nature by his own free will. He does not. This nature doesn't cease to exist. It's not like when Jesus incarnated for 33 years, God the Son just puffed into an existence, because that would be a contradiction of his nature, right? He always existed, but he assumed on an additional nature. That additional nature is the one which was subject to limitations by virtue of his own free will of choosing to assume that nature, right? Now, this nature always had the omnipotence, omniscience, all those things. It still possessed the divine attributes. There was never a time when he was ignorant and unknowledgeable. That's why, in principle, God the Son still remained omniscient. There was no contradiction. We're not asserting that God the Son, qua God the Son, in his nature, just as it is, suddenly became ignorant, because that would be a logical contradiction. In the same way, we're not saying with the Trinity, for example, that God is one being and yet three beings, or one person yet three persons, because that is a logical contradiction. We are using the same terms in different contexts, and so they have different parameters under which they're fulfilled. Therefore, it's not a contradiction.
So is it like?
You can't apply it to Rob because Rob is not a divine person in the Trinity.
Is it like?
So you can't
No, let me tell you why he cannot go to Rob example. Because he knows every single philosopher that he studies,
every single philosopher.
any philosopher that he's studying.
Wait. Am I have the connection? Am I not there? Yeah. Is it like? Okay, so I know your name forever, apart from tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Because tomorrow at 8 o'clock, I take some drugs, and then I can't remember anything.
So
Like I haven't changed who I am as a person. But my like.
So
my
when you talk about an all-knowledgeable being, knowing, affirming that he knows everything, this is an affirmation. That everything included 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Sure, like so I can know everything, but if I have some drugs, and then it means I can't.
God being drugged by who? He's independent.
So, and I know it's not a perfect analogy.
So I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about God. So God who is all knowledgeable. At 8 o'clock, he still knows your name. You cannot say he doesn't know your name at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Because he already knows that name. That 8 o'clock is included in his all-knowingness.
You're right. We
Right.
agree on that.
So now, if you have a God who is dependent for everything on someone else,
Okay.
That's different.
that God is not a perfect God.
Wait,
That's what I'm saying.
Rob.
So a God that is dependent.
I'm confused between me and my nature. Sorry, I'm not God, so I'm not saying that. I'm saying between God and his nature. Because you talked about God's
Is his nature perfect? Is his nature uncaused?
Well, that's why I don't know what nature
So
is.
let me tell you. We agree God has to be uncaused.
Why?
This is caused.
Again, that's an example.
If God, I'm sorry, I cannot really speak with you. You know why?
Okay, so I actually don't want to interrupt. Sorry, I don't. Can I say one thing?
Every principle, the essential attribute of God, like omnipotence, why? Omniscience, why? No. This is what you're saying. You're questioning something that is essentially an essential attribute of God. Uncaused, being uncaused, not being caused into existence. Because if you say, look, at one point, he didn't exist and he was caused into existence. So was he eternal? Was he omnipotent? No, of course, he didn't even exist.
We never said that.
So when you question,
Jesus was born as a person.
when you question the uncaused nature of God, you are saying that means it's possible God was caused. If it's possible he was caused, mean at one point he was caused into existence. So that means there was something at one point he didn't exist.
No, by that logic, yeah.
By that logic, because that's what you mean by caused. What are you causing to? Causing to come into existence. That's what causation means. So God by definition has to be uncaused, not brought into existence.
Yes.
Right. Jesus is caused, or the Trinity second member is caused by the Father, by their very dogma in their belief. He's caused, he's generated, he proceeds, he's begotten, he's caused. The Father, according to the model of the monarchical model, like you try to
Also, the
right,
normal Trinity says.
whatever, any model, the Father is uncaused. So now you have a being who is uncaused, and you have someone else who is caused. They are not equal, are they? Someone who is caused and someone who is uncaused. If you say they are the same, I leave the discussion here, and you go and study in Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard, whatever.
They're not
okay?
the same.
They're not the same.
We've never argued that
So if they're not the same, are they equal in their nature?
Can you be different but equal?
No.
Yes, you can.
When
There
you
we go.
so if uncaused makes you fitting to be God,
Why does it make you
does a caused nature makes you fitting to be God?
Wait, Matt, I'm going to head out. So I can
Thank
say,
you, thank
no,
you.
I'm going to say something before you leave. Okay, before I leave. Okay, a couple of things. So, he's given an example of dependence with the bike, right? And he said, why don't we worship the bike, right? He's ignored the fact the bike isn't omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, maximally good, none of these kind of factors. That's why we don't worship the bike, right? It's also causally dependent on its existence. It came into existence at a certain time. When we say that Jesus, God the Son, or God the Spirit, was caused or proceeds or generates, we never said there was a time 0 where he didn't exist and then a time 1 where he did exist. God the Son eternally exists.
Eternally dependent.
Yeah, exactly, eternally dependent. Now, he says, okay, the
worthy
fact that he's
question.
dependent shows that he's inferior or less than he can't be God. But he's never actually shown why dependence is a weakness. And what does he do? He just goes back to the bike again. It's a circular argument. He has to presuppose that dependence is a weakness to make his argument in the first place.
Show me philosophically that dependence is not a weakness.
Talk to me.
What is a weakness?
Talk to that guy, Josh. While I'm packing everything.
You know what?
Carry on. Enjoy.
You are.
No, I'll be
Thank you,
around
Luca.
here for a bit.
Okay,
Now-
well, nice to meet you.
I'll chat to you.
Anyone who says we need to demonstrate that dependency is a weakness is someone really out of their mind, unless they're a Christian, something like that. How can you even want to show dependency and independency? They're on the same footing. If you are self-sufficient, you are not dependent. And if you are dependent, you're not self-sufficient. Do I need to demonstrate that with quantum logic?
No, it makes sense. So I'm a slow
Right,
thinker,
right.
so it takes me a while to process
So the
things.
reasons why they're arguing and questioning is, look, if I were trained in philosophy and logic, I could have just given him just like that. Why? Because he knows that's the weakness, that I am not using the jargon that he's using. And he can only argue on the basis of, reputable scholars like the ones he mentioned this is okay. But we know how weak they are. Why? Because by definition, any being who is omnipotent has to be uncaused. By definition. All of them. They're all interlinked in their attributes. If you are omnipotent, you cannot be caused. If you're eternal, with no beginning, you cannot be caused. You cannot be other than omnipotent. So these essential attributes go hand in hand together. So the fact that we have found a being called second member of Trinity who is caused and dependent on the Father, by definition is not God. You can call it God, you can call this bike God, some people will do. Some people will call this bike God and worship Him. Some people will call Jesus God and worship Him. But it doesn't make them befitting to be God. Your heart and your mind will know a being who is dependent on someone doesn't befit to be called God.
Okay. Can I try and example it? So I've heard this used before. I want to know what your views are on it. So let's say I have a fish tank. I create loads of fish and I feed them. They're very dependent on me. And then through a science experiment, I make myself a fish and go join them in the fish tank for a while, swim around, have a chat with them, see how they're doing. And then I come back out again. And at the end of the science experiment, I come back out and I'm me again. So should they worship me because they were dependent on me, and then I became a fish, but then I'm not a fish anymore? Does that make sense? In terms of I want to know what your thoughts are on that. In terms of that is a metaphor for God and Jesus.
This is what happened. Jesus was God to begin with, but I'm questioning that point. Before you became a fish, I'm talking about your status before the fish.
Okay.
Right, that point you're not God to begin with. That's what I'm questioning. Because you are demonstrated in your definition as being caused and dependent on the Father, you are not God. You can call and label yourself out. I have a different definition of God. One is called a nominal definition. One is called a predicative definition. You can redefine God to suit your dogma. A Hindu can do that. Okay. Someone who's a polytheist can do that. You know what? When I say God, sometimes when I say God, that's the real God, and that's the God actually is not a real God. It's by predication. No, this is all semantics to get people confused and say actually it's God. But when you question, when you say the Son is a God by predication, and Father is a God by nominal, what's the difference? There is a difference.
Okay.
There is a difference. Because by predication, for example, you can say, this man is God, but actually he's not God, but I call him God by predication because he's nice and kind and knowledgeable. But you know, in reality, on the fundamental level, on a pragmatic level, he's not God. Likewise, on a pragmatic level, the Son cannot be deemed in any way God. Because he doesn't have the attributes of God.
So if we're the fish in the fish tank, how do we know that the man who feeds us isn't God?
You know.
How do you know that? Like, 'cause I understand your definition. I agree with it.
Right.
But I mean, like, how do you know?
So you can say, this is how we will eliminate who can be called God and who cannot be God. Anyone who says, I'm God, but I need to eat to sustain myself, I will say, by definition, you're not God. You cannot be God. Some people can call you God and worship you God, but you are not really deserving to be called God. The real God who's worth deserving